Hello, here Imam Yahya Pallavicini. I'm very thankful for this connection and this invitation to Professor Cross. And let me say hello to all the participants sharing this session and also the persons at St. Edward's University. Thanking also the Fletcher School for Law and Diplomacy for this second occasion after the first one previously at the NATO headquarters, always on policies and relations between religions and security. I'm very sorry not to be able to be part of your conference physically present due to this new engagement I was involved in being now in Zagreb in Croatia, where during the European presidency, the Muslim World League has organized an international conference on human brotherhood for the enhancement of security and peace. So we are always in somehow busy in the same topics as you are in Austin. But it is, of course, in this case, the anniversary of the Abu Dhabi Declaration on Human Fraternity that was launched by Pope Francis and the Imam of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayyib, with a specific interpretation on some of our contemporary challenges and social issues, such as, of course, security. Now, going to my contribution, I would say that actually to engage as a religious leader, or as I am as a Muslim European member with institutions is a very important cooperation. And so the reason of this importance of this cooperation between institutions, secular institutions and religious leaders is also to and somehow share the vision, but also the engagement and find together the solutions for some social issues or problems, or also, of course, concerning security. I would say that maybe there is a methodological guideline that due to our experience in these years, I would like to present. The first one is that it is not only of one community to respond on policies for security, but it is a duty for all religious communities, which in somehow involves different leaders and actors from different religious communities to engage together, even in an interreligious dialogue or rather cooperation, to show that the society where we live in the East and as well as in the West is a society of citizens, of believers that are pluralistically respectful one of the other and engage together in a cross cooperation with among themselves in terms of facing together the challenges of citizenship, of brotherhood, if you like, but also of the engagement with institutions. So it is already on a first level, interreligious dialogue and cooperation is part of a methodological solution for policies on security. Why? Because on one side, the manipulation, the abuse of doctrine of religions have hijacked our own authentic identity and have been manipulated to give legitimacy for violence, for hatred, for discrimination, and for any kind of terroristic or criminal activity, as if it was a revolution against the evil of a modern world or of secular institutions. And this is completely wrong. This is a manipulation or ideological manipulation of our doctrine. So it is also our duty to defend our doctrines and give the correct interpretation. And this is already providing a contribution as a counter narrative to the ideological narrative of the Islamist or the jihadist or any kind of other religiously denomination that use or abuse or manipulate religious doctrine. On the other side, doing this together, it increases the pluralistic contribution of spiritual sensitivities and religious doctrines in contemporary society. But the next step is that it is not only an engagement among religious leaders, it is something that needs to be also bridged and linked to the secular institutions. So to the policy advisors and policy makers, to the institutions that need to open to have advice and relations with religious leaders to face together the challenges on security or on hatred or on terrorism. And this involves a training of the religious leaders that cannot not only that cannot preach, but need to find ways on how to show the interpretation of their doctrine with in the context of institutional secular language and also find solutions on specific social problems or situations. And in this way, the cooperation can be successful. Otherwise, the risk is that only it is a theater show where religious leaders are involved, but just to have a positive feeling of peace, but not something that is concretely going into policies. Now, once this relation, this cooperation is somehow built according to these skills, one can go into more practical situations. And I would say that maybe some practical situations could be migration, could be international relations, or could be how to respect religious diversity in the context of one's own national country or identity and culture. So the first one would be migration, as an example. Too often, at least in Europe, we are facing some prejudice where slogans are used in order to prevent a migration, criticizing or demonizing any migrant or any foreigner as a threat to the identity of the Western European standards of life. And one of the arguments is that if we host all the migrants, we are hosting at least some potential terrorists. And so how to manage together religious leaders and Western policymakers the issue of migration needs to be already part of a discussion where human rights, national identity, migration, integration, citizenship, religious freedom should be somehow managed with no bargain on security. So security plus human rights, security plus among the fundamental rights, religious freedom, security plus cultural diversity, security plus development, but it's not security instead of religious freedom. And I think this is something that can be an interesting approach and cooperation once again, between religious leaders trained and skilled to present and exchange with policymakers and institutions. Another situation would be what happens in the Middle East, or in any other international relations, bilateral agreements, cooperations, or difficulties. Because too often a religious community or a religious member risks to have to answer to questions related to the political foreign policies with between two different countries, while the religious believers and citizens in one country should be consistent with this national linguistic cultural identity, and should not be in somehow ambiguously linked, or the object of a justification for any crisis between one country and their own country of origin. And this decreases the prejudice of a religious identity being a foreign identity, or a religious identity being linked to a different national identity, and or of the same religious identity linked to a foreign problematic critical national identity. And so having giving more space to citizenship rather than international critical crisis between two different countries. And the last point would be how to involve citizens in of different religious identities in the context of one's own country, without confusing again their foreign origin of their parents, or of these young migrants, with what happens in their former country, and avoiding to have foreign countries influencing in any way the development of a autochthonous religious identity in one's own country. I think this is quite important, because otherwise, if we have a Muslim believer in our country, but we are thinking that to manage his religious identity, we have to go back to any kind of foreign country, it will be always be a international relation, and not a domestic national religious freedom development. And this is something where at least we can not confuse the different situations one with the other. So these can be probably three examples as a model or as a challenge that can be somehow framed through a close cooperation between trained religious leaders that are representative but are also skilled to link the doctrine according to its interpretation in the context of a modern democratic secular society. And on the other side, the institutions could take benefit not in theological discourse, but on trying to understand the differences and the complexities on how to manage the richness of the varieties of their own citizens, but also of believers of abroad, in any kind of policy that might be on security, on domestic policies, or even on in international relations. So this is my contribution for the moment, and I hope we can be developing any situation and receiving also your inputs and outcomes from the discussion in the next future. Thank you very much again, and thank you to Professor Cross and to all the participants for your kind attention.